Hello ladies and gentlemen, I'm MangaKamen and welcome to my channel. This will not be the typical video that you usually see. Rather, this is a new experiment. A measured response in an attempt to explain issues I find with videos or people on the internet. It's a new series that I hope to do more of, so if you guys enjoy it, let me know with a like or a comment. Any sort of feedback is welcome. To kick off this series, we'll be tackling a video that I did an entire Twitter feed on. A video called Pokemon, the Devolving Designs by a user by TotallyNotMark, and featuring a person called Tom O'Regan. And like I said on Twitter, I found this video to be bad. And the first issue we have is with the title itself, Devolving Designs. It is a curious title to say the least, especially since the word devolving refers to some sort of degeneration or decline in the designs. It's an oddity and something I'll go more in depth when we come to it, but know that it's an issue that I'll be addressing later.
Pokemon. I love it. I've played the games, I've battled with my friends, and as a kid who was born in 1991, I was the perfect age to enjoy Pokemon when it took the world by storm near the turn of the millennium.
I know I've said this plenty of times in the past, but I too have a similar experience, having grown up with all the games, Pokemon Blue being my first experience with the series. I bring this up because as someone who has grown up with the titles and has his own experience in the world of design, art, and character creation, what he brings up in this video will irk me to some end, especially with how it's presented.
However, an aspect that's bothered me more and more as time passed by has been the direction in which these Pokemon designs have gone in. So, before I got ahead of myself, I decided to ask my followers on Twitter to participate in a poll. The question I asked: what generation of Pokemon had the best designs? With the options being Gens 1 and 2, Gens 3 and 4, Gens 5 and 6, or Gens 7 and 8. These were the results, with almost 80% voting for the first 4 generations.
So this is a fun little note. When I actually posted my tweets about my issues with his video, TotallyNotMark informed me that he often goes against the polls in his videos. Which is totally fine. If you have an opinion that is different from that, I have no issues with it. However, not only does this add nothing to the actual video, it sets up confusion with the audience. Why even bother posing the question if you're not going to address the actual winners of the poll in your video? Why even have it in there? Mark has addressed this in his video's pinned comment, but it's still an issue that I feel needs to be addressed. In addition, when I replied to him about how I found the video didn't make a strong case, he replied with the following: I had 10 pages of notes. I had to condense it down to a 13-minute video. I tried to make my argument. I'm happy with it. If you didn't get something from it, that's fine. This sort of response confuses me. Not only does he actually contradict himself in his own pinned comment afterwards, but I find the idea of there being 10 pages of note and condensing the video down to meet a 13-minute video length to be odd. Not for naught, but there were things that could have been cut out, such as the Twitter poll entirely, the opening montage, going through the entire history of the artist in the Pokemon franchise could have been cut down, getting rid of the fluff essentially. Honestly, for such a divisive topic, especially considering the character designs that have been, controversial in the world of Pokemon, length should be the last thing on your mind in this regard, especially if your points are the ones you want to focus on. But getting back to my original point, Mark then goes on to say this.
And if you look in the comment section, primarily the first 3. But why is that? Why do people have an affinity for the older designs and not the designs of the latter half of the series?
I'm sorry, but I simply don't believe that the poll didn't actively play a part in your video. Not only are you taking the words of just over 1,000 people to expand that across an entire fanbase, you use that fact that your Twitter followers, people who follow you because of Dragon Ball content, will be an accurate representation of the Pokemon fanbase. There's an old quote that said, lies, damn lies, and statistics. I can only follow your wording here, Mark. Why should I believe that this poll didn't have any significance to the video? Especially when you included the line,
why do people have an affinity for the older designs and not the designs of the latter half of the series?
You can say that you go against the poll all you want, but you still use the poll to promote the idea that the older designs are more loved with a faulty method of attaining that opinion. Regardless whether or not you, the viewer, agree with the sentiment that the old designs are better, this was not the best way to start this video off, especially considering how the poll grouped the different generations together, meaning that if people didn't like Generation 7, Generation 8 would not get a fair shake, especially considering Generation 8 only has 3 Pokemon revealed at the time of me recording this video. The same goes with Generation 5 and 6. Although I adore Generation 5, from what I've seen of the internet, there have been lots of people who do not like Generation 5. And those people would be wrong, because Gen 5 is the best. But regardless, we'll be getting back to this in a similar point later when it comes relevant, but keep this in the back of your mind.
This is the design for the fire starter Charmander in Generation 1 of Pokemon. And this right here is the design for Generation 8's fire starter Scorbunny. That is quite a difference. But how did this happen?
A question that is very simple, really. They use radically different art styles. Even then, I would like to point out that while yes, you are comparing two Pokemon fire starters, I still believe it's an unfair comparison. Not only because of the shift in art style, but also for precedence, or in Charmander's case, a lack of them. What do I mean by that? You see, Charmander has an advantage that Scorbunny doesn't, i.e. it came first, generation-wise. You see, over the course of time, we've received a wide array of Pokemon that hold similar traits to their real-world counterparts, some of them even holding on to the same basis in animals. Being part of the first generation, Charmander had no priors to compare itself to. In a sense, it set the standard for lizard Pokemon, and therefore Game Freak couldn't, while going forward, use designs that are similar to it lest they be called lazy for recycling. They still get called lazy for ice cream Pokemon and garbage Pokemon. Into that I say, shut up. Calling Pokemon design lazy simply because it resembles a real-world object is utterly baffling to me, especially since we've had Pokemon before that are based off the concepts of real-world animals with little to no difference added to them. And while the argument holds valid for some Pokemon like Vanillish being an ice cream cone, it also applies to things such as Voltorb being a Pokeball. In both cases, it isn't exactly the point, regardless of it is lazy. The problem lies in those who admit it to accepting one but not the other. Meanwhile, in almost 3 decades and almost 1,000 new Pokemon, we've seen several other Pokemon priors. Scorbunny has a stacked deck against it, with Pokemon such as the Nidoran line, Azumarill, the Baniri line, and the Bunnelby line, all of which draw inspiration from rabbits in various forms. Game Freak would have to find a way in order to not only incorporate the rabbit design into Scorbunny, but also make sure they don't tread over pre-established ground. And this is a concept that neither of these two ever consider touching, and in fact, will go against it.
Every single game released.
I'm here to eat ass and chew bubblegum. And I'm all out of ass.
What?
Ken Sugimori was one of the 2 founding members of Game Freak alongside series creator and my fucking boy Satoshi Tajiri.
That is not Satoshi Tajiri. I realize it's a nitpick and it's not really detracting from their arguments, but I know I'd get comments complaining if I didn't actually point that out. So screw you guys!
Back when Game Freak was just a magazine, he used to handle the art side of things, so we sort of wound up being the chief artist for the Pokemon franchise when it first started, and remains so today. Sugimori found himself responsible for designing all the human trainer characters, as well as Pokemon like Ivysaur, Venusaur, Blastoise, Pidgey, Spearow, Fearow, fucking all of these guys, and also Gengar. Gengar was his favorite.
If you look closely at his early designs, he really liked to implement tough-looking features to his characters. The fur is distinctly jagged.
The fur is distinctly jagged. Next you'll tell me that sandpaper is as smooth as butter. I'm sorry, but that doesn't make sense. If anything, the fur looks smooth. If your zoom is any indication, you're pointing towards the shading, but that doesn't give a jagged feel. It's shading in order to indicate a rough estimation of where Pikachu's headline is. Oh, and for all your complaints about things have gone jagged and feral to round and cutesy over the course of the video, Pikachu actually kept losing roundness as time went by. Its face is just as cutesy as ever. Hard to count it as your prime example in that regard.
An example of such multitasking was by Shigeki Morimoto. He was a game designer and programmer, but he also helped design some of the series' favourites, such as Floordix, Floordix again, Gay Charizard, Actually Just a Cat, Actually Just a Cow, Actually Just Your Mam, and Mew.
The reason why I played that clip was to showcase a few things, most notably Meowth and to a lesser extent Mankey. This context is necessary for a future argument.
Making up the 3rd and final member of the Pokemon design team was... nope.
Motofumi Fujiwara. Look, I'm the guy who pronounced Kakyoin wrong. This sort of name isn't all that hard to even pronounce. Again, another nitpick, but something I'm sure people would get on my case if I didn't bring it up.
At this point, the first Pokemon games were in the middle of being designed, and when looking at his current roster of designed Pokemon, Sugimori noticed an area where they were lacking. He said, and I quote, "Pokemon, as its Japanese title Pocket Monsters suggests, is a game in which monsters battle each other. At the time I figured that since they were monsters, they should have a tough look, but midways through I thought, I'd like some cute ones too. There weren't many designers in the company at the time, and I was doing most of it. That is why I asked one of our female staff like Atsuko Nishida to join."
There's a few problems with this. First, where is this quote from? Whenever you quote something, it's important to provide the source of said quote. Otherwise, this is rather meaningless since there's no way of knowing if these quotes are actually stated or not, or if you just pull them out of your ear. Nothing but social media plugs in the description. Starting to get some flashbacks to...
Oh shit, here we go again.
You don't even need to say where the quote is from in the video, just link it in the description.
The decision to design more cute Pokemon was made. In addition to wanting people to battle with their Pokemon, they wanted to encourage trading also, and to do so needed greater variety in the designs on offer. And so, once tasked with creating some cute monsters as the fourth and final member of the original art team for Pokemon, Atsuko Nishida went right to work designing many Pokemon, including the Oddish, Bellsprout, Poliwag, and Ponyta lines, all the starters for the first generation, and one that would ultimately become the mascot for the series, Pikachu.
Now here's the interesting thing, she didn't just design cute Pokemon. I find it interesting that you leave out Pokemon such as Charmeleon, Charizard, Wartortle. Now, cute is a broad definition and it reflects on person to person, but Charizard does not scream a cute design to me. Subjectivity, yes, but again. In addition, I find how they gloss over the Bellsprout line and Oddish line's more interesting members, in this case Gloom and Victreebel. Again, two Pokemon that I find it hard to believe you could call cute.
What's interesting is that when the games were being localized for a Western release, they actually changed some of the sprites to make them look less like the unfortunate result of a sex crime. Sprite work was tough back in the day, because the Game Boy could only display a whopping total of 4 pixels at any given moment.
This is no time to start speaking Australian, Jim!
Yeah. Let's move on then.
Okay, that one actually hurt. I'm sorry, but are you sure you've got that right? It can only display 4 pixels at a time? I'm gonna need a resource on that one, because that doesn't sound right. Do you know what a pixel is? I looked at the technical specs, and nowhere did it ever say that. So where is this coming from? Are you referring to the 4 colors, or 4 shades of black and white and gray?
The designs, colours and poses had to be kept pretty basic if you wanted them to be recognisable, and even then they were pushing their luck sometimes.
Again, this is why I question if you didn't mean color, since the original Game Boy didn't have color in it.
Why do I think these designs were so great? They emphasized that these were creatures, wild animals that you can venture out into the wilderness to find. These revised designs for Red and Blue looked as though they were sketches of wild creatures from a biologist's journal. They aren't posing for the camera for the most part, they are either attacking it in a defensive position or looking off elsewhere. Character creatures, not toy adverts. Pocket monsters, not pocket toys.
Oh boy, so much wrong here. First off, you talk about the technical limitations, but you completely forgot the concept that games are now in a 3D plane, not just a 2D plane. You see, you fail to consider dimensionality. Does the design function in a 3-dimensional environment? And how does the silhouette change from different angles? And considering that they had to be moving, that's another aspect you forgo to talk about. Secondly, you bring up Alolan Raichu and regular Raichu, but both are created to the same artist, Nishida.
Pocket monsters, not pocket toys.
Third, even back when these monsters served various purposes in the world, there's a huge difference between design and posing. Plus, back in your initial poll, that still doesn't matter, by the way. You never mentioned whether these were characters depicted in their game of origin instead of continued depiction of these designs in the later titles. Scyther, for example, is no longer bearing weapons in an attack position. It's holding them steadily in a resting position in its 3D models, but has the same design. You forgo to even talk about if people actually care for the designs themselves in modern interpretation, or if they care for the original interpretation.
You know, it's interesting that he talks about how good the wild animals are in this generation, yet is completely ignoring the rocks, magnets, sludge, balls of gas, the Pokeballs, a ball of vines, the living IVF lab that looks like pink goo, the boxer, the kickboxer, Jinx, Mr. Mime. I don't know, it just seems kind of really weird to me.
Because of the success that cute Pokemon like Pikachu had found, Game Freak's design team decided to double down on that angle.
You got any actual evidence of that being the case other than just your assumptions and looking at the actual designs? How do you know that was actually a decision made by Game Freak and isn't just a happy coincidence? You don't provide anything to back that up, you just say it. Why should I believe you?
As the series went on, things like sharp teeth, fur, claws, and overall edge took a backseat in favor of more rounder, friendly, cute and soft designs.
Now, originally I was going to do a montage of Pokemon that actually don't follow this critique that appear in later generations. However, I noticed the fact that 1, that would be time consuming, and 2, it'd get real boring, even if I did put like, you'll never see it coming behind it. Therefore, I'll point this out. During this section, they do not provide an actual example of this. Now, some people will probably point to the Raichu and Alolan Raichu. However, I'd like to point out that regular Raichu always had those rounder, softer details to them. The design always had that. In addition, I'd be curious as to what Pokemon they are referring to. You say that they adopted rounder, softer designs, and for more cutesy. I'm not going to disagree on that fully. However, the fact of the matter is, which designs are you looking at? That's the question here. It comes off as vague and way too general for my tastes.
And on top of that, despite having the biggest teams working on the designs to date, Generation 6 and
Weavile is not a Generation 6 Pokemon!
and 7 produced the least amount of new Pokemon to the series.
So what if there are fewer designs? That does not mean the quality of the ones they made were any lower. Plus there was a reason why there were fewer, as at the very least they chose not to repeat their plan for Black and White, and give a mix of old and new. And with so much old, they'd make less new. A good idea? A bad idea? Not the point of this video, since it's based on the designs alone. Which adds another interesting question. Why are you even bringing this up? It has nothing to do with design. Furthermore, you completely disregard Mega Evolutions in the Alolan forms, and that's not even considering Pokemon like Oricorio, which has vastly different forms that they can be considered different Pokemon altogether. If we include those, Gen 6 and 7 are about on par with Generations 2 and 4. And before anyone says Mega Evolution and Alolan forms don't count because they are based on existing designs, going by that logic, we would have to discount any and every evolution and pre-evolution of a Pokemon that was introduced in later generation. Now one can easily say like they are extensions of the original Pokemon. However, I'd also like to point out that there are also different designs as well, and that also needs to be taken into consideration.
That said, I would imagine there needed to be more artists for the later games as they shifted into the 3D space. However, once the anime found success and Pikachu took the world by storm, I personally think that the design team decided to hedge their bets on the cute factor more and more as time went on. And so, the somewhat realistic, more creature-based design theory was thrown out in favor of softer, rounder, more cartoonish design principle.
You know, I honestly don't really understand why you're saying this is personally a belief of yours, especially when you're framing the entire video in a more objective manner than you actually say it is. But if I can look towards Pokemon nowadays that actually go against this notion of yours, stuff like Zebstrika, Sandile, Toucanon, there are plenty of Pokemon that go against this notion that you're saying that they threw out the more realistic designs. Hell, Toucanon was actually a very good example of that because people actually complained that it was too much like a regular toucan.
2018, Ken Sugimori, still the art director for the series, was recanting a survey he gave to the folks around him before the release of Red and Green. He said, "I printed out the complete pixel drawings of the Pokemon and asked people which Pokemon do they like best. The overwhelming winner of the survey was Pikachu. The reason for this survey was to sort out which Pokemon would appear in the game given its limited capacity." Now, the context of this statement was an interview discussing the creation of Pikachu and the success the character found, implying that even before the game was released, Pikachu was capturing the hearts of those that saw it. However, in an early interview taken with Shigeki Morimoto, one of the 4 original members of the design team and creator of Pokemon like Dragonite and Mew, had this to say: "We had a poll in the company once a long time ago to see which Pokemon was the most popular, and back then the winner was Executor." Now, this statement doesn't conflict with Sugimori's necessarily. There could have been many polls taken during that time, for various reasons.
Again, the biggest issue here is you don't provide the sources. I can't find out if any of this is true or not.
But what I found interesting is that it doesn't seem to follow the cute is always best school of thought that seems to dominate the modern designs. And what's more is that survey couldn't have happened recently either because Shigeki Morimoto left the Pokemon team after Generation 3.
Actually, no he didn't. He's been a part of the Pokemon team and is actually credited in Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. He's just not on the design team, and if your quote is to be believed, they asked the entire company, not just the design team.
So, after all this talk, how would I fix this? How would I bring the latest starters from the 8th generation into a similar design philosophy to Generation 1? Let's start with who I think is the biggest victim and example of the new design philosophy: Scorbunny.
Oh shit, here we go again.
Now, believe me, I thought this would be a simple enterprise. I would just take elements from the original designs and substitute it into the new Scorbunny design. So that's what I did originally. I made a list of design elements from Generation 1 I thought might fit with the design, but the more I did this, the more I realized I had to change the character entirely. I couldn't keep his face as flat as it appeared, I couldn't use the cheek puffs, I couldn't even use the ears. And trust me, I tried as many different ideas and posings as possible, and none of it worked. So at that point, I decided to take a step back and start from scratch, and study some real rabbits, which ultimately led me to this design. I decided that this was the right direction to go in and built upon that, trying out tons of different designs, asking friends their opinions, ultimately finishing with this. My Generation 1 Scorbunny design. I tried to mimic the sharp, jagged fur Sugimori would use to communicate the fire element of his design. I kept the overall white color of the original while giving him a more realistic head shape with buck teeth, while of course making it appear like a journal sketch of a wild animal, not posing for the camera. I implemented the exact same design philosophy for Sobble and Grookey to achieve the same effect.
Let's go with Scorbunny, apparently the worst offender. And this relates back to what I stated before, that we've had plenty of different rabbit-like Pokemon in the past generations, even something like the Nidoran line, which actually looks oddly familiar to this redesign. Both are rabbits, but the design is failing to the same traps that this video is made to criticize. The Scorbunny is trying too hard to be an actual rabbit, instead of trying to be a Pokemon. Nidoran has a lot going on for it that isn't a rabbit, to the point where it feels like something else entirely, which is why it works. Your redesign completely also ignores the fact that other Pokemon like Meowth, Mankey, and even Primeape all held elements that are drastically different from their counterparts. Like how Meowth has on 2 legs, all 3 had longer arms and more humanistic elements to them. In fact, I find it really weird that you rip into Morimoto's designs as just a bull or just a cat.
Actually just a cat. Actually just a cow. Actually just your mom.
When in the same video, you praised these aspects showing Pokemon like Rattata or Butterfree, which are just a butterfly and a rat. And in fact, honestly, Meowth and Tauros actually have more going on for them outside their actual inspirations. But for Scorbunny, you tear that away and go for a generic rabbit. In addition, you scorn the rounder and cuter designs.
As the series went on, things like sharp teeth, fur,
Oh, excellent.
claws, and overall edge took a backseat in favor of more rounder, friendly, cute and soft designs.
That's what you did to Scorbunny in your design, especially in the torso and head departments. Remaking Scorbunny doesn't even make sense, at least to me, especially when you watch carefully on his list and his video. They bring up creatures such as Meowth, who actually has a lot of similar design elements to Scorbunny. Long limbs, long feet, oval-shaped head. Even back in Generation 1, there was no actual reason why he should have scrapped the original design when Meowth exists to counter the entire thing. Hell, the original Meowth artworks didn't have the tufts of fur as well, and I seriously have a hard time buying that he couldn't make that work on Scorbunny's original design. In fact, it's kind of odd that he actually removed Scorbunny from being bipedal. Why? Because we had other Pokemon such as Charmander and Squirtle who were bipedal, and he sacrifices Scorbunny's bipedal nature for a quadruped. As you've been seeing for the last few moments, I drew Scorbunny in the Generation 1 art style, in order to show that you don't need to sacrifice his original concept in order to actually make it look like it's a Gen 1 Pokemon. If my version doesn't fit his description, there's something beyond what's said in the video. Honestly, the only real difference is the jaggedness, and that's an art style, not a difference in design choice. But what I find more interesting concerning this is what your partner says next.
When artists were creating the first 151 Pokemon, they were drawing from childhood experience and interests, taking reality, adding some imagination, and voila, Pokemans. Personally, I think that's what's largely missing from the modern designs. Things feel less handcrafted and more factory produced.
Why does this not apply to the newer designs? Scorbunny is literally taking a real-life rabbit and adding imagination to it. As for factory produce, neither of you proved that at all in this video, let alone have me believe that this is the case, especially with Scorbunny. It's rather odd that you bring that up, and expect me to believe it when this video did not prove that to be the case at all. The designs are rounder, the designs are cuter, they're meant to sell toys, shock of all shocks. All these things were elements that were in the original generation as well. They were meant to sell a product, as the goal was the original games as well.
You know Diglett? Yeah, that's actually basically just a character that Morimoto made up when he was a kid. He even used to draw flipbooks of him. And now his childhood doodles are recognized and loved all across the globe. Isn't that fucking magic?
And, honestly, Diglett is probably the worst things to bring up since it has the roundness design, doesn't have any actual elements to it, and certainly doesn't look like it's a real-world counterpart of a mole. In fact, it looks more like a whack-a-mole than an actual living creature. And there are worse things to compare Diglett to.
Sure, it's phallic. Why wouldn't it be?
Look, Mark and I are all but certain that there isn't a discussion happening behind Game Freak's closed doors. and it's difficult to fault them for that.
What? What the hell are you talking about now? There isn't a discussion behind the doors? How the bloody hell would you know? Based on your interpretation on design that's completely biased?
To make myself clear, this is by no means a jab at the anime's redesign for smoother animation. I am a massive fan and advocate of that practice for animation specifically. I'm speaking purely about the design principles behind the current generation of Pokemon themselves. Designs that look like they fit in more on a store shelf than in the actual world, living and breathing. I don't expect this will change.
Shows Meltan completely neglects to show Ditto. Shows Marshadow, a ghost Pokemon, but neglects to show Mr. Mime, Jinx, and once again, the designs of the original Pokemon are not the same as the style in which they're depicted. Would Machamp and something like Pokken be considered a good design while Machamp and Sword and Shield are bad simply because they are depicted in a different way? They are the same design, and unlike something with the detailed fur on Weavile or Suicune, not much will change between the two. In all honesty, this whole video was a mess. You failed to actually prove your point, and it felt like it was steeped in Gen 1er logic.
But, and this is probably just my nostalgia talking, I kind of feel like the spirit of what made Pokemon look like Pokemon has been replaced by plastic imitations. It almost seems like they've missed the point of what Pokemon had been established to be as in the first 2 generations.
Oh wait, you serious? Let me laugh even harder.
Do not get me wrong, I am not calling you a Gen 1er.
I kind of feel like the spirit of what made Pokemon look like Pokemon has been replaced by plastic imitations.
Character creatures, not toy adverts.
It almost seems like they've missed the point of what Pokemon had been established to be as in the first 2 generations.
Pocket monsters, not pocket toys.
Although I certainly wouldn't blame people for thinking that way. But considering the fact that you fail to actually distinguish between art style and design, I do not believe it. Honestly, it's perfectly fine if you don't like the latest designs. There's nothing wrong with that. But to claim that the designs are devolving in a way like this, it doesn't prove your point. In any case, I'm MangaKamen, thank you for watching, and remember to examine your fandom.